And welcome back to the Excellent Everyone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send us an email, xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And to find out about the programming we have available for you, 7/24/365 on the Xzone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net, and on the Xzone TV channel on Simul TV, www.simultv.com. My guest this hour is Paul Smith. He is the author of 3 books and was born in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. He was a 4-year-old mass communications major with an English major at Southeast Missouri State University. Today, Paul lives and works in Western Missouri, working on other books, movies, and screenplays. Paul's first book, MO41, The Bombshell Before Roswell, was well reviewed by readers and shown on the History Channel series Ancient Aliens in late August of 2016, and a featured segment on the Cape Girardeau UFO crash of April 1941. Coming this November, Paul's latest startling nonfiction book, JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot, The Explosive New Theory of Oswald in D.C. For more information on Paul, join him on Facebook at facebook.com/Cape Girardeau 1941 UFO Crash, America's First. And Paul, welcome to the X Zone.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Never heard of Cape Girardeau. Tell me about it.
It's a small town. In 1941, it was about 20,000 people. Today, it's about twice that, and it hosts my university, my alma mater, Southeast Missouri State University. My parents went to college there with the father of Sheryl Crow, the famous rock star. And her aunt was a sorority sister to my aunt at the university, and I went there in the 1980s. It's a fairly sleepy, conservative Christian community. It certainly was very much in 41, and it still is today, on the banks of the Mississippi River.
Now, tell me about the alleged UFO crash of April 1941.
The story seems to always begin with a letter written by a woman named Charlotte Huffman Mann. It circulated among UFO researchers in the 1990s, and they began showing up in Cape Girardeau and trying to learn more, and they didn't find out a whole lot. But it was a fascinating story. She said her grandparents told her the tale of how in 1941, in the month of April, probably, I've guesstimated April 12th, the night before Easter, a Saturday night, that a call came into the Huffman family home, and the Reverend William Huffman took the call and said to his family, there's been a plane crash outside of town. They need some spiritual comfort, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help, and took off in an unmarked car. And he came back later close to midnight, and he was pale and shaken, and the family asked him, what's going on? What's wrong with you? And he said, I'm going to tell you this story once, and then I'm never going to speak of it again. And apparently he lived up to his word. He said, you know that airplane crash, that the phone call and the airplane crash? Well, we got out there, this associate of the police department and I, and we found the flames and some wreckage, and the firemen, the police department, a couple of, or at least one FBI agent, a couple of reporters with big flash cameras. But it was not an airplane. It was not a cylindrical craft. It was circular shaped. It was grayish silver. It was cracked open. And Reverend Huffman says, I got a peek inside, and there were a couple of small seats and gauges and dials and a silver band around the inside of the cockpit with some strange hieroglyphics he could not make out. And he looked over, and there were 3 casualties, 3 bodies on the ground, and they were all identical. 3 grayish silver creatures, non-human, big round heads, big black eyes, long thin arms and legs. 2 were dead, and a third one he knelt over to say some prayers with his Bible. It was still breathing. There was still some amount of respiration, and as he was saying his prayers, the creature went limp and apparently died. While he was standing there in shock, 2 men picked up a dead alien and propped him up underneath the arms and spread his long, skinny arms out and posed for a picture from a newsman who whipped out a small Brownie camera from his pocket. And after he took the picture, he stuck the photo or the camera back in his pocket And then there was a new invasion force that came over the farm field that night. It was the United States Army that showed up and hemmed them in and said, put that down, put the bodies down, the wreckage, any shrapnel, give me your notes and your photos, your film. This did not happen. You never saw this. It's a matter of national security, and you're never to speak of this matter again. And you might wonder, well, how did the Air Force or the Army get there so quickly? It turns out the sheriff of Cape Girardeau County had a brother in the Air Corps in Sikeston, Missouri, which is about 35, 40 miles south of the crash site. And it was obvious that he had been alerted because it was that crew that apparently showed up that night in some vehicles. And the captain of that aerial training school had come directly from Washington, D.C., and he probably placed a call or two and was told, clamp down on this real fast, get the evidence, and get it over here. So they scooped up all the debris and the bodies and silenced all the witnesses, asked them, to keep this oath of silence for the rest of your life, and don't let it out. It's important to American security. And then they took off with all the physical remains and the crash, the craft itself. So there wasn't much left anyone could do. They had their photos taken back, and they weren't to talk about it. And the story, in many cases, kind of just slipped away through the years, especially when World War II broke out in December of '41 after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
All right, so when did this story first break after the initial crash?
I would say that if it happened in April of '41, probably April 12th, it was kept muzzled in most circles until this woman, Charlotte Huffman Mann, put it all down in a letter form and sent it in the early 1990s. Okay. And people started showing up in Cape, and it made a front page article in the local Southeast Missourian newspaper. And since then, other reporters like Art Bell and Linda Moulton Howe have advertised it on the air. And I began to hear all of this stuff and think, wow, this is my own hometown. I asked my dad, who was alive at the time. He was about 6 years old, and he had not heard of the story. And I was told that Rush Limbaugh, famous Cape Girardean, and he used to be my umpire when I was in the Little League in the park when he was a struggling DJ. He had been asked on the air on his radio show in New York City, Rush, what's up with this UFO crash story from your hometown? And he simply said, there's more to this story than you might think. And he moved on to the next caller. He didn't want to talk about it, but he did not dismiss it as a bunch of kooky, crazy nonsense, get this off the air type of attitude. So Rush's father had been in town in Cape Girardeau as a budding pilot. He took lessons and was a big Air Force pilot in World War II and the Korean conflict. He's a very highly respected veteran, and he was an attorney in town that my father used to know. So I suspect Rush Limbaugh, the broadcaster's father, told him, I've been informed that Rush has been telling a few people, and I don't know this for certain, that he heard the story when he was in high school in the 1960s. My own stepmother said the same thing. She heard the story first in high school in Cape Girardeau in the 1960s, well before this letter came out in the 1990s, and the story began to spread.
Go ahead. I find it rather ironic that it parallels the Roswell crash of 1947, and that it first happened in 1941, and nobody heard about it until the 1990s after this lady wrote a letter about it. Now,
yeah, somewhat. There's another story about a Cape Girardeau fireman. He came forward to his family when he had stage 4 cancer, and he said, this rumor about this UFO crash outside of town, the whole thing is true. He says, I was there. I was fighting the fire for the Cape Girardeau Fire Department. I saw the bodies. I saw the crash. And I talked to the Army. They came in and they caught me trying to pocket a piece of debris. They took it back, chewed me out, kicked me out of the crash site. And he said he felt later he was being watched around town and that his telephone was tapped, which I found out in a little research that J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI and even President Roosevelt were crazy about wiretaps. They tapped just about everybody they pleased in those days, even though they really shouldn't have.
But in those days, it was the communists that they were after, not after UFO buffs.
Or Nazi spies.
All right, stand by. We've got to take our break. We'll be back on the other side. X Zone Nation, our guest is Paul Smith. We're talking about The 1941 crash, alleged crash of a UFO in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Don't go away. Paul Smith is my guest. We're talking about an alleged UFO crash that is purported to have happened in April of 1941 in Cape Girardeau in Missouri. Once again, our guest is Paul Smith. And Paul, what kind of evidence is there to substantiate the claims of the many pertaining to this crash?
Yeah, certainly no physical evidence. No one's come up with a piece of debris that they can bring forward.
How about photographs?
That I uncovered was that a man said his grandparents owned the farm where the crash occurred, and he went there and found the farmer who had bought the farm from his grandparents, and the farmer told him that he was trying to dig a cistern on the property, and he dug up this strange twisted metal that had weird symbols and writing on it, and he couldn't make it out, and he couldn't cut it, couldn't twist it permanently or crease it, and he stored it in his barn. He said the old man wouldn't tell me where he took it eventually, and so that's where the story ends. It's kind of a dead end, but it's a very intriguing clue.
Wow.
We have people who have I've spoken to who said, oh, yes, my parents talked about the crash, or my grandmother used to just say matter-of-factly that UFO crash back in 41. What one woman told me was that she was a little girl around 10 years old on a farm south of the crash, and said, oh, yes, I remember the excitement at the time, my parents talking about this little outer spaceship that crashed and that there were little people on board. She said, we never used the term UFO or ET or even alien. It was just little people, and that's what had the community in a tizzy. But since so many were asked to be silent, not write anything, not talk about it, not take any photos or of the crash site in later years, and it was all hushed effectively. There seems to be no physical evidence or even a newspaper account that can be found of it.
Now let me ask you this, Paul. It parallels the Roswell story. The alleged crash happens 50 years, and then people start talking about it based on a letter that was written by this woman, Charlotte. Why do people? Wait a sec. Hold on.
Heard about the crash in the 1960s. She doesn't know much about the letter business.
All right, Paul, hold on here, please. Even the 1960s, that's 20 some odd years later.
Right.
Why? It seems implausible to me as a former police investigator, based on the fact that there is no evidence, based on the fact that it was hushed for so many years, based on the fact there's no photographs. In my book, the fireman who is dying, who made a deathbed confession, doesn't carry any weight. So what is there to actually say that this really did happen, besides a lot of hearsay evidence?
Circumstantial and hearsay evidence. Many a court case is won on circumstantial evidence alone.
Well, we're not talking
if
about a court case here.
If we had physical evidence, I'm sure the government would step in and snatch it away from you pretty quick. But I tend to agree it's very frustrating. Almost all the witnesses, not only deceased, but their children are deceased. So there's almost no one you can talk to today, or the exact location of the farm. You can't go there either because it hasn't been pinned down precisely. So it is very frustrating.
Yeah, it's either frustrating or non-existent. How do we differentiate between the two in this case?
Well, I try to lay out the evidence for this, or the circumstantial case for this in my first book, and I got a number of responses from people on Facebook and emails, and I had some leftover data, so I created Three Presidents, Two Accidents as a sequel in later of 2016. Once again, very frustrating. People have these stories that one woman came to me and said, my grandmother was on her way to church, she said, and she stopped and talked to Reverend Huffman that next morning, and that he was pale and shaken and said he'd been to a crash site. But, you know, once again, anyone could make up a story.
Sure.
When you take the preponderance of the stories, I believe it is probably something that did happen, but we simply cannot prove it.
I agree something may have happened, but whether or not it was a UFO, you know, that's a far stretch based on no evidence.
Well, I would encourage folks to read the first book or the second book, which has a summary of the first book in it, and then more information and tales of how I went there and tried to find out more details and talk to some more people. I just wish there had been this photograph that was taken of the dead alien. Charlotte Huffman Mann said the man who took this box photo of the alien brought it to the Huffman family home about 2 weeks after the crash and said, here, I want you to have a copy of this. I've got a copy. You take this one. And Reverend Huffman didn't really want it, so he gave it to his son. And the family used to pull it out and pass it around during private family parties. And Charlotte, as a little girl, saw it about a dozen times. And she said it was really creepy. It was, again, the big bulb-headed alien with big black eyes and a tiny little slit for a mouth and little nostril dots and long, thin arms and legs, 3 fingers and 1 thumb on each hand. And so a neighbor came over one day, a guy used to be in Army intelligence, and he asked to see the photograph, and he took off with it, and they never saw it again. So we can't even produce that as proof. We just have some amazing stories.
But once again, we cannot prove that there was somebody from Army intelligence like there was in the Roswell case who actually came over, took the photo, and ran away with it. That's a great way.
True.
That's a great way of saying.
What proof do we have that the Roswell crash ever took place?
Oh, listen, I don't believe Roswell crash ever took place anyway. You know, you're not. You know, I like proof. I love proof. And as a broadcaster and as a journalist, I believe it's my job to present as much of the facts available to my listeners. And when it comes to Roswell, there's very few facts. In fact, the fact that Jesse Marcel took the evidence to his home and let his wife and son examine it blows that case right out of the water because the chain of evidence was broken. So let's toss Roswell away. However, municipalities, towns, and cities are making a killing in the para-tourism industry.
Oh, yes, that's quite correct.
So how do we know?
They're capitalizing this in Roswell with museums and T-shirts and parties and such.
Yeah.
You'll find none of that in Cape Girardeau.
Then why the book?
People ask all the time, why is there not a book on this? Even I ask the same question. So I put together all the data. One of the pieces of circumstantial evidence are a series of supposedly leaked documents that you can find on Robert Wood and Ryan Wood's website, majesticdocuments.com. One is a 1947 report that mentions the findings in the New Mexico desert were compared to the Missouri crash of 1941 and thought to be genuinely extraterrestrial in nature. And you can read more about that at Mr. Wood's fine site. I put a chapter of document references or seeming references into my book. That's not proof either, because anyone can really rig up a fake document, I suppose, if they wanted to.
Exactly.
There were 2 references to the 1941 crash within this 47 document, which was supposedly supposed to be for Harry Truman, the president.
Why do you think that? Why do people think that the government is as nefarious as covering up all these crashes, and the same people who make the claims that the government is suppressing information are unable to find or provide any evidence to the contrary, that they are, in fact, covering stuff up?
It could be a fear that they're afraid of a panic if anyone should find out, and they want to keep this recovery business hushed up so they can examine it before the public finds out and control the story, which they have never released. When I first heard the Charlotte Huffman man story, I thought, aha, I gotcha. There was no FBI office in Cape Girardeau in 1941, and in doing my research, I found out, well, what do you know? 1 month before the crash, the FBI opened an office in our post office in town. So an FBI man most likely was there, even if it was an airplane crash, which I don't believe it was. But in Cape Girardeau, we had a very large German contingent who had even their own German church services in the German language back then, and we were very much in a tense situation with Germany. Most Americans thought it was inevitable. We're going to war with Nazi Germany, and they might even attack us. So I can see where the FBI and the Army at the time of the crash would ask everyone to keep this hushed. We might have us an attack here by the Nazis, or information and material that we could utilize in a secret weapon against the Nazis. Who knows? So I can understand more why it was hushed and why they asked people, do not talk about this.
The fact that there was no article or mention of this alleged crash in the newspaper, that raises flags. But has anyone gone to the FAA to do an investigation as to see whether or not a crash on that date had actually been reported to the FAA or any other aviation authority?
Not to my knowledge, and I tried to look into this a little bit. I'm not sure what kind of records are around. That's the case in so many, hospitals and police stations and such. I went to the Cape Girardeau police station trying to find out what kind of records did someone go out on a call. The fire department records were supposedly lost in transit, although there's a little call sheet for the month of April, and it mentions one night they went out on such and such and came back late. It's not definite proof, but record keeping may have been a little scanty and then lost over the years, so it just makes things even tougher.
All right, stand by. We've got to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. X Zone Nation, Paul Smith is our guest, and Paul and I will be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And we're coming to you around the world tonight on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, iHeartRadio, Simul Radio, and Simul TV. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Paul Smith is our guest. And Paul, what do we know about Charlotte Huffman?
Very little. She lives in a small town in Texas and works for her church there. Her grandfather was a minister, and they had two sons, and one died in World War II, and her father was the other son who moved the family around, and they eventually settled in Kansas. And for a while operated a store there. The family pitched in, and that's where allegedly the Army intelligence man came across the street and invited his way into the party and took the photograph away and never returned. So beyond that, she's only given a limited little bit of interview some years ago, and I think her attitude is, I've told everything that I know. There's nothing much left to say.
All right, so her actual name is Charlotte Huffman. I'm sorry, I didn't get the third name.
M-A-N-N, man.
Oh, man. Ah, gotcha, okay. How did she get the information? You know, was she part of the Huffman family who was actually involved in this at the very beginning?
Well, they didn't want to tell her as a little girl, and she kept seeing this photograph of a dead alien, allegedly.
Right.
And so she badgered her grandmother, Floy Huffman, who lived into the 1980s but had cancer and was very ill, and she, Charlotte, felt it might be the end for her grandmother, and the story might die out. She asked repeatedly, please tell me this story. What was this business about an alien crash? So the grandmother relented and told her everything that she knew, And she checked with her sister, who seemed to confirm some of the information, but her sister does not care to go forward. She prefers to remain private. So that Charlotte debated what to do and typed up this letter, and eventually found its way to some investigators like Leonard Stringfield and Stanton Friedman and Robert and Ryan Wood, who produced a sci-fi channel show called The Secret Evidence That We're Not Alone, which featured about 2 minutes on Cape Girardeau, and so has Hangar 1 on the History Channel, and now a couple of years ago, Ancient Aliens. So there's a little bit of notoriety, and some other people have done a little investigating. I wish more people would get involved and really blow the case wide open. They're free to peruse my books from Argus Publishing and find out for themselves.
But what happens if these people do the investigation and if the investigation proves that this never happened? It was all an urban legend.
Well, no one's found that out yet. I haven't met anyone who said, oh, I looked into that. What a bunch of junk.
Yeah.
Everyone says it's intriguing and they'd like to know more. I wish that I could remember some quote. There was a famous Timothy Good is a famous British UFO investigator and author. And he said, judging from the facts, I believe the Cape Girardeau crash really did happen. It was the first one of these, and it was genuine. Now, once again, that doesn't prove anything, but it does bring a different perspective of a different researcher or investigator. But, they are all looking for material for books and TV documentaries,
Sure.
aren't they?
They are, and 95% of anything you see on TV pertaining to UFOs is nothing but a bunch of bunk. You said Timothy Good said judging from the facts. What facts did Timothy Good have that I haven't heard tonight?
Well, he worked with Robert and Ryan Wood in putting together the Sci-Fi Channel special, The Secret Evidence That We're Not Alone.
Right.
It ran about 15 years ago, so I don't know how much he dug into it, quite frankly. But I think judging on what he learned at the time, and hopefully he read my book years later, I have not made contact with him, so I guess you'd have to ask him.
I've had several conversations with Stanton Friedman, and not once has he ever mentioned to me the Girardeau UFO case.
He came to Cape Girardeau and was asking some questions, went to the local newspaper office, as I understand it. I have never heard him downgrade or slam the story. I tried to contact him, but being a nobody at the time, and still a nobody now, I did not hear back from him. So once again, you'd have to contact him and ask him, see what he thinks, if you can get through.
I will. What do you think the significance of this alleged case is? Why should it be pursued?
I wish it was pursued so we could pin it down. Is it fact or is it fiction? We always need to know the truth on every matter. I mean, why look into, let's say, what's going on today with the FBI or judgeships in the Supreme Court? And everything? We need to know information to make a solid opinion.
Wait a second. How can you put the nomination of a Supreme Court justice in the same category?
Because they are investigating that. The FBI is looking into it. We need to judge whether this man committed sexual assault crimes before we put him on the Supreme Court. We have to have all the facts before we make up our minds.
They are allegations. They are allegations. They're allegations.
The FBI will investigate a little. Let's hope the media does too, and we'll find out if the allegations are true or not.
You see, the FBI does background checks. It doesn't investigate non-crimes. In order for an investigation to be conducted, Dr. Ford would have had to go to the Maryland Police Department where the crime occurred. Now, since there's no statute of limitations on the sexual type of allegation crime that Dr. Ford is making against Judge Kavanaugh, she could go there tomorrow, file a complaint. The complaint would be investigated, but all the FBI are going to do is another background check. They do not.
So the FBI should not ask questions and not investigate. Is that what you're saying?
They don't investigate. All they do in this case is a background check.
It's the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Sir,
what do you think they're getting their name from?
Sir,
It's what they do.
They do not.
We're getting way off course here and talking about a UFO crash.
Well, you brought the judge into the UFO crash, not me, sir.
Apparently mistakenly. Let's talk about something else.
All right,
or this interview could be over. Which do you want to talk about?
Well,
UFOs,
sir,
or you want to talk about Judge Kavanaugh?
Well, sir, if you terminate the interview, then all our listeners will give you no credibility whatsoever.
Oh, that's not true. I think they would really resent your snide attitude and your disrespectful attitude,
sir,
saying that 95% of all UFO cases are bunk.
They are.
You've developed an opinion without much fact. You are a skeptic, and that's quite clear. And therefore, this interview is over.
There you go, Exxon. Another person who, when put into a corner, asked for proof, asked for some semblance of sanity. They run, they hide, because they are cowards. They live in a world of fantasy. They live in a world where, you know what, a little bit of information will get them to sell books. Paul Smith is looking for at least 1 second of fame. And as you can see here, he really doesn't understand the world of investigative procedures. Obviously, he doesn't agree with the method in which the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh is going. He doesn't really fathom reality. He's another wishy-washy person who really just wants to get out there, maybe bring fame and fortune to his little town. You know, what can I say? He dropped a lot of names, but when push comes to shove, he cowered, he hung up, just as many UFO people do. They are afraid of the truth. And the truth is that they have none. They live in a world of fantasy where everything they see is a little gray man from a UFO crash that has no proof because the government has taken it away. And in this case, when we're looking at the story of Mr. Smith, the Army intelligence officer was shown the picture, and he took it and he ran away with it. Isn't that very convenient? Well, just imagine that. The convenience of not being able to provide any proof, but claiming that something happened. We've got a fireman who makes a deathbed confession. Big deal. Anybody can make a deathbed confession. That doesn't mean it's real. You've got... And then I asked him a very simple question. If somebody claims an airplane crashed, what did the authorities say? Did anybody go to the aviation authorities and say, did a plane crash at this place at a certain time and a certain date? No. Why not? This is what happens when you get non-investigative people who really don't know how to investigate or what to look for. Go out, say they've done an investigation, and then they come back with nothing. And then when they are challenged about the facts and the findings, they panic. And rather to continue to make themselves look very stupid and foolish, what do? They hang up. There you go. Another one bites the dust here on the X Zone. And you know what? They're a dime a dozen. They're a dime a dozen. You know, he mentioned Art Bell. Big deal. I love Art, but he was a sensationalist. He mentioned Linda Moulton Howe, another sensationalist. He mentioned Ancient Aliens. Now, there's a bunch of wackos. The truth. That's what I want. I want the truth. I want evidence. And if you can't provide me with that, be honest and say you can't. But don't try and BS me, because you know what? It will not work. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.